Okay, welcome to this video walkthrough for assignment number 6 for CPI 211. We cover a lot of content this unit in class. In this video I'm not going to cover everything. I'm just going to focus in on what you need to do to complete assignment 6. So I'm here in 3ds Studio Max, and what we're going to do is to create an animated bug that we will then bring into Unity and have some code associated with it in Unity, so that when a player clicks on it in Unity it will start to flap its wings and it will play a little sound as well. So let's start off by drawing a wing and then animating it. I'm going to start off here in the top view. I'm holding down Alt-W to expand out that view. Then I'm going to come over to the command panel here, and I'm going to select the second button to create a line. You'll see here it is, line. And I'm going to stick with the default creation method, which is initial type corner and drag type Bezier. Basically what that means is that it will work sort of like the line or pen tool in Photoshop that we've used previously in class. If I just click somewhere out here in my view, I'll create an anchor point, and then if I click and drag, I'll create a Bezier curve. What I'm going to do first is to just click some anchor points out, and then I'll show you how you can convert a corner type of anchor point into a Bezier after you've laid out a path. So here's the sort of origin of my world here inside 3ds Studio Max. And what I'm going to do is I'll just click here, and I'll come click out over here, and I'll click here. Let's see, make another one right about here. I'm trying to make this fairly uniform in shape. I could be using Snap to in order to snap to get a really clean shape, but I don't need to do that. When I get close to the original anchor point and then click, I'll be asked if I want to close the spline, and I'll say, yeah, I want to close the spline. Alright. Once I've got the shape sort of roughed out, I can select any part of this line that I've created, and I can do it in a few ways. If you look over in the, now I'm on the modify panel, if I look down in the central part here, you'll see something that looks sort of similar to what we did when we were doing editable poly. So I've got a vertex selection. If I do that, you'll see we can now see the vertices, and if I come out and click on one and use the move tool, it will allow me to move those around. And then I've also got a segment tool that lets me select a given segment, which I can then move as well. Since I'm in the top view, I can only move in 2 dimensions, not 3 dimensions, which is good. That's what we want right now. And I can select the entire thing, like so. Alright, so that allows me to sort of move and reshape a little bit if I want to reshape this. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this one here, and I'm going to drag it out a little bit, and select that one there, drag it out a little bit, just so we have a more of a matching shape. Another thing I can do is I can grab, I'm still here on the vertex one, and if I kind of click and drag and select any of the vertices in this line that I've created, then I right click, I get this quad menu that we've used before. Remember, before we were converting primitives into editable polys. We're going to go to a different place this time. If you look up in this section of the quad menu, you'll see that right now that point is a corner. If we convert that to a Bezier, you'll see suddenly now we've got those little anchor bars that I can click on and then use that to adjust. Be helpful if I click on it with the move tool. There we go. Okay. Now you'll see when I pull it out, it'll start to draw out a curve. And I'm constrained right now to, it looks like, to the y-axis based on the view that we're in. If you're not sure which sort of constraint is in place, there you go. You can see what it looks like right here. So I can get a nice curve going there. I can also come up here and right-click anywhere on this toolbar and choose Axis Constraints, and I'll get this little pop-up here. That'll let me choose a different axis that I want to be constrained. Now if I pull these around, you'll see that it's being constrained to just the x-axis, and then I can choose x or y, and that will let me make a nice clean curve like this. All right. One other thing I can do, I'll go ahead and leave that open. I've still got that selected. I'm going to come over and right click, and I'm going to change it into a Bezier corner. The difference is now it separates the two sides of those adjustment bars. Okay, now I can pull this one up and it doesn't impact that. I can come back, set my constraints to X and Y. So I'm having a little trouble because we have this thing sort of blocking the way. I can actually turn that off if I want. Go under Preferences, come up to Gizmos, and you'll see Transform Gizmos. Turn that one off. Now I don't see it anymore, and I can grab that. Again, set the constraint to XY, and that allows me to adjust just that side of the curve. So I'll play around a little bit with this, and what I'm going to try to do is this is going to be the inner side of a wing that's going to flap, and I want to have a sort of a nice, fairly symmetrical and curved shape coming out here. I'm going to pause the recording. I'll complete drawing out a nice looking path, and we'll continue. Alright, I've got it drawn out. It's fairly symmetrical. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for what we're doing. I'd like to turn my Transform Gizmo back on, so I'm going to go to Customize Preferences one more time, Transform Gizmo on the Gizmo tab, and choose On, and say OK. Then I'll have that back again. I'll go ahead and turn off this Access Constraints window for now. And I'm going to shrink down the top view, and I'm going to switch over to the perspective view. I'm going to right-click into that rather than the regular click. By right-clicking, I will keep the selection here that I've got, and then I'll expand that out. Now I've got this line set up, and you can't actually see, but it is a closed path here. It looks as if it isn't here, but it is. Then I'm going to come over to the modifier list, and I'm going to choose Extrude. Now we were using Extrude before in a slightly different way with our editable poly modeling. Now we're going to take this line and we're going to choose Extrude from the modifier list. We're going to come down to the parameters where it says amount and set that to some small amount. I'm going to set it to 0.05 meters. And when I do that, you'll see it's expanding that out here. You don't actually need to mess with the segments here. You can pretty much leave it as it is right there. So you'll see now I've got the beginning of a wing shape out here. Probably good enough for what we need. There are other modifiers that you can mess with. You're welcome to play with whichever ones you want. For simplicity's sake for this assignment, I'm just going to leave it like this. Now the next thing we need to do is right now the origin point, the pivot point for this item that's going to be a wing is right smack in the center of the object. But we actually want the pivot for the wing to be over here so that it will look like a wing flapping on a bug. So here's how you can do that. Over on the command panel, come over to the hierarchy, click that tab, then you'll see the section that says pivot and then adjust pivot. Underneath that, the section that says Affect Pivot Only, click on that, and you'll see you get a slightly different transform gizmo. I can move that, and the model will stay in place, but the gizmo itself will move and have a new point. So I take a look at this and see what it looks like in my top view. I can see that I probably want to move it over a little bit more, and I might want to move it down a little bit more. It's helpful having this model that I created, this line that I created, set right in the center of my world. So I'll close that out, come back over here. That looks good. Once I've got the pivot point in place, then I can deselect pivot from the hierarchy menu. And now we go back to our regular gizmo. Now we're going to animate this. And we're going to make a flapping animation. Here's how you can do a simple animation. If you look down at the bottom of the interface here, this is an animation timeline here. To animate this, we're going to use a couple of buttons, well, a few of them actually. We're going to click on the auto key to start with, and then we've got the set keys, or set key. Okay. And we're on the first frame of an animation that doesn't exist yet, and I'm going to set a key there. Then I'm going to move out to, let's say, frame 10. And I'm going to change the rotation, and I'm going to make it so that our wing is going to be up. Now, if you see in the down at the bottom of the interface and look at the Y rotation, you'll see that it is going to negative, 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 negative. I can set that directly here as well. I'll set it to negative 30. With this auto key selected, what will happen is I move the timeline to a given frame. I modify something about the transform of this object, its rotation, its scale, its position are the main ones we're going to work with now, and automatically a keyframe will be selected in that location, and then between that frame and the original keyframe, it will interpolate between the setting in the first frame and the setting in this frame. So watch, as I rotate back to frame 0 and come back to frame 10, you'll see we automatically have a nice translation animation set between those 2 points. So I'm going to come out to frame 20, and I'm going to set my Y back to 0, so that flattens it out again. Then I'm going to come out to frame 30, and I'm going to set the Y to 30, and it will drop down there, bring it out to 40, set the Y back to 0, and just like that, we have a nice flapping animation. Once I've done with my animating, I deselect this auto key, and that will then end my session of animation. I can always turn it back on if I want to continue to mess with that animation. Let's continue. Now we've got one wing set up nicely. What I'd like to do is simply make a copy of this current wing, and to save myself some time, I don't have to sculpt out another one. The other one's going to be exactly the same. So I'm going to hold down, I've got the move icon selected. I'm going to hold down Shift, grab the X, and just pull it, and that will make a duplicate of this one. I can choose to make a copy or an instance. I'm going to make it a copy. It'll be a separate instantiation of that original wing. Then I can rotate this around, and you'll see at the bottom I'm rotating on the Z, so I can also just enter that in, enter in 180. Then I'm going to position both of these slightly away from the sort of 0, 0 point. It doesn't have to be exact. I'll use the grid lines to roughly see what it looks like, and I can take a look at the top view here as well. And that actually looks pretty good. Come back into my perspective view. Now I'm going to draw, I'm going to create a body for this, and I'm just going to simply make a, let's just make a, let's go back to our primitives, and I'll make it a sphere. Might as well choose auto grid, it'll connect it right onto this grid. Click and drag at the origin, about that big, looks good. And if I poke around, I can see that that seems to be lined up pretty well. If I come down and drag my animation. You'll see I have a nice animation. Not a fancy bug, certainly, but not bad. So we're getting close, and a requirement for the assignment is for you to create a texture inside Photoshop, like we've done a few times in class already, and then apply that texture using the UV map to these wings, and then you can apply some texture, the same texture or a different texture, or just a color to the body. I'll leave that up to you. But just as a reminder of how to assign a texture to these wings, let me show you now. So I'll grab that wing over here. I'm going to come to the Modify panel here, and then I've got this extrude here. Before I go on, I'm going to go ahead and convert that to an editable poly, and that will collapse that stuff down. Do the same thing over here. Convert that to an editable poly. That will collapse that thing down there. Then I'm going to come to my modifier list, go down to the U section, grab UV map. It's automatically going to choose a planar type of map, that which will work just fine. You might choose box too, it's very similar. Hitting the M key on my keyboard to bring up the material editor, selecting the first slot, coming down to diffuse and clicking the little square next to it to bring up the material map browser. Double click on bitmap, and then I'll choose, just since this is, well, let's choose something a little more interesting. Let's see, a nice one that I could use for our scene here. I'll come into island, and I've got nothing there. Alright, I'm just going to grab texture off of our terrains that we've been using in the past. So I'll have a very odd looking bug. It's going to have a wing that looks like a cliff. So I'll click that and say OK. Drag it in and drop it on my wing, remembering to click on this Show Shaded Material in Viewport, and that will show it out on my wing there. Okay, then I'll minimize this for just a second. And then if you remember, for the UV map, if you expand it out in the command panel and click on the gizmo, you can move the positioning of how that texture's on there. In my case, it makes absolutely no difference since I've got just this very simple looking texture, but that'll work fine. Okay. But I've come over and select my other wing. Okay, let's see, I'm all set there. Come back to the editable poly, select this guy over here, come to the modifier, choose UV map, and I'll make it a box as well. Reopen my materials, drag this guy on top of there, and I think the positioning is just fine. Then I've got to have I'd like to add a color to the body of my bug. In my case, I'll be lazy just to save time. Instead of choosing a material, I'll just set a diffuse color, and I'll set it as yellow. Okay, drag that out there, and we should be all set to go. Good. Okay. So now, this is pretty much set. Some students have asked how you can group these together. You don't actually have to group them together when you bring it into Unity, but you can pretty easily. One way to do it is to select each of these items, holding down the Control key to be able to select all three. Then go to Group on the menu, choose Group, and then give it a name. I'll call mine Bug. I'll call it Bug 3 because I've been making some other bugs. And then suddenly now you've got those all together. And by using the group, you don't interfere with the way the animation works. There are other ways to connect these. For example, people often use attach to connect objects. But if you do that, you basically would hook the body to this wing, and then when this goes to flap, the whole body would move down as well with it, which is not what we want. Okay, so we're set there. We'll save our scene, and I'll save this as Bug 3. And then I'm going to export it, which is a requirement for the assignment, and I'll call it Bug 3 again. Now when we go to export the FBX file, we're going to modify the settings a little bit. We've been using embed media all along to make sure that we get our textures coming with the model. This time we also need to make sure that we include the animation with it, because we're going to want to bring that animation into Unity. So I've got that selected, and I choose OK, and then it will set it out. So let's get out of 3ds Max and come into Unity and bring that object into Unity. Here I am in Unity. I've got just a blank scene, and the only thing I've added is a directional light, so we'll have a little light on our object. Go to Assets and import new asset. Search my way until I can find that model that I just made called Monster 2. Here it is. Click to import that. And then you'll see it shows up here in the project view. I'm currently using a single column version of the project view. Might be different than what you see in yours. If you right click, you'll see you can change between 1 and 2 column. And I'm looking at my Monster 3 saying, well, that's not the one that I wanted to bring in, so let's make sure I bring in the right one. Oh, it was Bug 3 is what it was called. So I bring that in, it imports it, and then you'll see it here in the preview. Now, before we bring our bug into our scene, we need to make some modifications to the import settings, or at least we need to pay attention to these import settings. Take a look at the rig section. This rig section helps you set the way that any animation that is attached to the model will be brought into Unity. We're going to be working here with the legacy type of rig, the version of animation that's been with Unity forever until very recently. I'll click Apply there. Then I'll look over at the Animations tab, and you'll see that there is just simply one animation with the default name of Take 1. I can rename that if I want to something that makes a little more sense. I'll call it Flap Wings. And then it's the entire animation, so we don't have to change anything about it. It says 0 to 100. As we know, it's not actually 0 to 100, right? If I click this clamp range, it will then set it to what it actually is, which is 0 to 40. Now we're going to see in a minute that we actually want to modify that, but I won't get ahead of myself. I hit Apply. Now I can bring my bug out into the scene. And let's bring him a little bit closer over here to our camera. Okay, there he is. If I click on the bug in the hierarchy and look at the inspector, I'll see that here's the Flap Wings animation. You can see other animations that exist, is just that Take 1 is still there. And I've got play automatically applied, so if I hit play, I'll see my wings flap, but they only flap once, so why is that? If we go back to our Bug 3 in the project, check the Animations tab, come down to the wrap mode, it's going to default to playing once, whatever the animation is in the model that was created. Well, we want it to loop, so I'll hit Apply, and let's take a look and see what that looks like now. Now you notice when the animation gets to sort of the middle of the flap, there's sort of a pause in the flapping. So if you think for a minute about why that is, when we created the animation in 3ds Studio Max, frame 0 had the wings straight across. Then at frame 20, again we had the wings straight across, and then at frame 40, again we had the wings straight across. So when we loop, there are going to be periods of time where we have 2 frames where we're sort of sitting with the wings straight out. So if I change over here in the inspector the start frame to 1 and the end frame to 39, hit Apply, I'm getting rid of a couple of those pauses, and so now you should see those wings flapping more smoothly. When you're playing with animations inside Unity, you can mess with the start and end frames if you want to grab a portion of an animation that was created inside whatever the modeling application was. Good. In the next video, we'll continue on, and I'll show you the scripting that you need to do in order to be able to click on this object in Unity to make the wings flap and play a sound.